My name is Tegan Thompson. I am 32 years old, and I spend my days hunting financial fraud. Right now, I am standing at my kitchen island, holding a single sheet of paper up to the light. It is a quitclaim deed printed on thick legal stock. The signature at the bottom is supposed to be mine. It leans the right way, it loops the right way, but I did not write it. Beside that signature sits a notary stamp, making a felony look like standard paperwork. How much does a mother's loyalty cost? In my family, the going rate is one downtown Tulsa loft and a blind eye to federal fraud. Welcome back to Morning Revenge, where we untangle the family secrets people try to bury. If you have ever watched your own relatives turn your boundaries into a battleground, you are in the right place. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from tonight, and hit subscribe, because you will want to hear exactly how this legal trap snaps shut on the people who set it. But to understand this piece of paper, we have to go back 3 weeks. It was a Tuesday evening. I had just finished a 9-hour shift tracing shell companies for my bank's compliance division. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and kicked off my heels. 2 sharp knocks echoed through my entryway, followed by a long press of the doorbell. I opened the door. My mother Brenda and my father Gary stood in the hallway. Behind them hovered my younger sister Cassidy, checking her reflection in her phone screen. Nobody said hello. Brenda brushed past me into the living room. She did not take off her coat. Her eyes swept over the exposed brick, the tall windows facing the Arkansas River, the polished concrete floors. She priced the space in her head. "Your sister's getting married next year," Brenda said, turning to face me. "Give her this apartment so she can start her married life here." I kept my hand on the doorknob. The brass felt cold against my palm. "You want me to give her my home?" Brenda nodded like we were discussing the weather. "She needs it more than you do. Trent is an entrepreneur. They require a space that projects success to his investors. You are single, Tegan. A 1-bedroom rental is fine for you." My father stepped into the room. He crossed his arms and squared his shoulders. "If you refuse, do not expect us to treat you like family anymore. This is what a supportive sister does." I looked at Cassidy. She was standing by the kitchen island, dragging a manicured fingernail along the quartz countertop. A small, satisfied smile rested on her face. She was already picking out paint colors. A memory pressed against the back of my mind. I was 18 years old, standing on a damp porch, looking at garbage bags full of my clothes, while a deadbolt clicked shut from the inside. I let that memory freeze the blood in my veins. I looked my father in the eye and kept my voice at room temperature. "Or you could kick her out like you did to me and let her figure it out herself." The air in the room stopped moving. Brenda closed her mouth. A dark red flush crept up my father's neck. "You will regret saying that," he said, his voice scraping the bottom of his throat. I pulled the door open wider. "You know the way out." They left in a flurry of footsteps and muttered insults. I shut the door and slid the deadbolt home. Then I walked to the tall window and looked down at the street. I expected to see Gary marching toward the custom Ford truck he washed every Sunday. That truck was his prized possession. Instead, my father unlocked a faded silver sedan with a dented bumper and a rental barcode taped to the back window. The compliance officer inside my head woke up. Gary Thompson would never drive a budget rental unless a bank had already taken his keys. They did not just want my loft for Cassidy. Something was draining their accounts, and they had just tried to use my home to stop the bleeding. By 8 o'clock the next morning, my phone felt hot to the touch. The notifications stacked up on the lock screen like a slot machine paying out bad news. Brenda did not waste time. When my mother faces a boundary, she does not retreat. She builds an army. I poured black coffee into a travel mug and tapped the first voicemail. It was Aunt Susan. Susan is a woman who treats church gossip as a competitive sport. Her voice came through the speaker, dripping with manufactured disappointment. "Tegan, we heard what you did. Your mother is in tears. How you can sit in that big empty apartment and deny your sister a decent start in life is beyond me. You need to pray on this selfishness." I deleted the message halfway through. Next was Cousin Mark, who had not spoken to me since I refused to co-sign his motorcycle loan 5 years ago. He sent a text message calling me a bitter spinster who wanted Cassidy to be as miserable as I was. A text from my great-uncle told me I was breaking my parents' hearts. In the space of 12 hours, Brenda had drafted, edited, and published a narrative across the entire extended family. In her version, there was no ambush. There was no demand for my real estate. There was only a grieving mother asking for a tiny favor and a jealous older sister slamming the door in her face. Public opinion, in a family ecosystem, works exactly like a rigged jury. The verdict is decided long before anyone looks at the evidence. The goal is isolation. The goal is to make the target feel so alienated they surrender just to buy back their seat at the Thanksgiving table. I sat at my kitchen island and watched the morning commute crawl along the bridge over the river. Most people would feel an overwhelming urge to defend themselves. They would type out long defensive paragraphs in the family group chat, explaining the truth. They would try to reason with people committed to misunderstanding them. I did none of those things. I learned a long time ago that engaging with Brenda is like negotiating with a hostage-taker who brought her own hostages. You cannot win on her territory. Cassidy was always the designated winner anyway. Growing up, Cassidy was the dancer, the cheerleader, the girl who got a brand new car for her high school graduation present. I was handed a set of matched luggage and a map to the local community college. My usefulness to them was always strictly financial. When I was 22, I worked double shifts to pay off Brenda's credit cards. When I was 25, I covered Gary's emergency dental surgery without blinking. Every time I handed over cash, they patted my hand and called me a good daughter. The second I stopped writing checks, I became the enemy. Trent fit perfectly into their delusion. He talked fast, wore expensive watches, and sold them the illusion of wealth. They wanted proximity to his imaginary success so badly, they were willing to serve me up on a platter to get it. The coffee burned my throat in a good way. The texts kept rolling in. Heart emojis for the bride, thumbs down emojis for me, a coordinated social freezing designed to break my resolve. But they miscalculated. They forgot what I do for a living. I grabbed my keys and drove to the glass tower in downtown Tulsa, where I spend 50 hours a week hunting ghosts in financial ledgers. The bank I work for holds billions in assets. My department protects those assets from identity thieves, wire fraud rings, and predatory lenders. My daily routine involves tracking offshore wires, auditing suspicious loan applications, and dismantling shell companies. Walking through the marble lobby, I felt the familiar chill of the air conditioning calm my nerves. The security guard nodded. The elevator hummed. This was my territory. In the compliance division, we do not deal in feelings. We do not care about excuses. We deal in verification. We assume everyone is lying until the paperwork proves otherwise. I sat down at my desk and booted up my terminal. The dual monitors glowed against the gray fabric of my cubicle. I took a deep breath and made a silent, permanent shift in my brain. As of this morning, Brenda, Gary, and Cassidy were no longer my family. They were high-risk counterparties. They were bad actors probing a secure network for vulnerabilities. When a threat actor wants an asset they cannot take by force, they look for back doors. The loft was an unencumbered asset. I owned it free and clear. That meant no mortgage company was standing between the title and anyone bold enough to try and claim it. I was the only line of defense. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the county clerk's office. The clerk who answered sounded bored, shifting paper in the background. I asked to speak directly to the recording department supervisor. I explained in my calmest professional voice that I had credible reason to believe a fraudulent real estate transaction might be attempted using my name and address. The bored tone vanished immediately. The supervisor walked me through the process of placing a fraud alert on my property profile. Any deed transfer quitclaim or lien filed against my downtown address would now trigger an automatic freeze. Nothing could be recorded without a direct phone call to my personal cell phone and my physical presence at the courthouse with 2 forms of government identification. But I knew that was not enough. County systems update slowly, clerks make mistakes, fraudsters move incredibly fast. Next, I called the internal security team at my own bank. The fraud prevention specialist on the line was a guy named David who sat 2 floors below me. I told him I needed to lock down every checking, savings, and investment account under my social security number. David asked if I had lost my wallet or clicked a bad link. I told him the threat was domestic. I told him someone who knew my mother's maiden name, the street I grew up on, and the name of my first pet was actively trying to ruin me. We spent 45 minutes building a fortress. We disabled all online password recovery options. We removed my email address as a secondary verification method. Then we set up a rigid verbal password. If anyone called the bank claiming to be Tegan Thompson, asking about balances, wire transfers, or title loans, they would be asked for a specific code word. If they could not provide it, the representative was instructed to immediately terminate the call, flag the account for suspicious activity, and notify me. I did not choose a birthday or a pet name. I chose a random string of 12 alphanumeric characters. I hung up the phone and looked at my screens. The perimeter was secure. The alerts were live, the drawbridge was pulled up, and the moat was filled. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and watched a single text message pop up on my phone screen. It was from my mother. The message read, "We are willing to forgive you if you do the right thing, Tegan. Do not let pride destroy your relationship with your only sister." I read the words twice, admiring the sheer audacity. She was standing in the ashes of the bridge she just burned, offering to sell me a bucket of water. She thought she was talking to a frightened daughter, desperate for her mother's approval. She had no idea she was talking to a hardened auditor who had just categorized her as a primary financial threat. I turned my phone on silent and shoved it deep into the bottom of my bag. Let them talk. Let Aunt Susan gossip to the church group. Let Cousin Mark sneer from his unpaid motorcycle. Words do not transfer deeds. Guilt trips do not hold up in court. My armor was up. I had built a wall of red tape and security protocols around everything I owned. To touch my assets, they would have to break federal law and bypass systems designed to stop professional crime syndicates. I stared at the blinking cursor on my monitor, letting the silence of the office wash over me. A bank vault is only secure if you know all the ways inside. I had locked the front door and barred the windows. Will it be enough to stop a family that genuinely believes they already own you? Wednesday afternoon arrived with a tense quiet. The glass tower where I worked felt like a climate-controlled sanctuary against the humid Oklahoma heat. I sat at my desk, analyzing a string of suspicious routing numbers originating from a Nevada shell corporation. The steady rhythm of my keyboard usually clears my mind. Today, the keystrokes felt heavy. The security perimeter I built around my personal accounts had held strong all morning. I monitored the internal dashboards for any unauthorized access attempts or strange credit inquiries. The screens remained clear. The quiet should have been comforting, but in my line of work, quiet usually means the threat is probing the fences, looking for a blind spot. The digital phone on my desk chimed. It was the lobby receptionist. Her voice carried a flustered, charmed tone that she normally reserved for senior executives. She told me my future brother-in-law was downstairs holding 2 iced coffees and asking for a few minutes of my time. I stared at the blinking light on the receiver. I could have instructed security to turn him away. I could have cited strict workplace policies regarding personal visitors on the compliance floor. Instead, I told her to send him up. An auditor never refuses an opportunity to examine a suspect in the light. You gather the most valuable intelligence when the target assumes they are running the interrogation. 5 minutes later, Trent strolled through the double glass doors. He looked entirely out of place among the gray cubicles, the muted carpets, and the silent focus of financial analysts. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit a little too perfectly across the shoulders, indicating custom work or a very good tailor paid on credit. A heavy rose gold watch slid out from under his cuff, catching the harsh fluorescent lighting. He carried the coffees like peace offerings, flashing a bright, practiced smile at every female colleague he passed. Trent operated on the core assumption that charm functioned as a universal currency. He met my sister Cassidy at a charity gala 8 months ago. She was volunteering at the registration table. He was drinking top-shelf bourbon and handing out thick, embossed business cards, listing himself as a venture capitalist. My parents fell in love with his vocabulary before they ever verified a single bank statement. He pulled up an empty chair and sat next to my desk, uninvited. He placed 1 sweating iced coffee next to my keyboard. I left it untouched. Trent leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, attempting to manufacture an immediate sense of intimacy. He spoke in low, soothing tones designed to de-escalate a hysterical person. He told me Brenda and Gary were just old-fashioned. He explained that they grew up in a different era, where blind family sacrifices were expected, and they simply lacked the modern tools to communicate their needs properly. He painted himself as the rational, educated middleman caught between a stubborn, independent daughter and a pair of misunderstood, aging parents. I kept my hands folded in my lap and let him talk. Silence is an effective tactical weapon. People despise a vacuum in a conversation, and they will usually spill their own secrets trying to fill the empty air. Trent filled the silence by revealing exactly how little he respected my intellect. He waved a dismissive hand at my dual monitors. The screens were filled with cascading rows of encrypted transaction data, regulatory frameworks, and risk modeling algorithms. "Look, Tegan," he started, his tone shifting from soothing to deeply patronizing. "I know you work hard here. Being a glorified bank teller is a very stable job. It pays the bills. But you have to look at the bigger picture. Cassidy and I are building a lifestyle brand. We are hosting high net worth investors. We need a primary residence that communicates stability and explosive growth. Your loft has the right aesthetic. It is downtown. It sits in the right zip code. It is wasted on someone who just punches a clock and processes deposit slips all day." A cold spike of amusement hit my chest. A glorified bank teller. He honestly thought my job consisted of handing out lollipops and checking identification cards at a drive-through window. He possessed zero concept of the forensic accounting required to dismantle international fraud rings. His ignorance was my greatest advantage. Because he thought I was financially illiterate, he felt comfortable running a very cheap hustle right inside a federal banking facility. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, pressing my spine against the mesh. "Make your point, Trent." He smiled, showing all those expensive porcelain veneers. "I am a reasonable guy," he said, smoothing his expensive lapel. "I do not want to take your home for free. That is unfair. Your parents let their emotions get the better of them last night. They were out of line. So I brought a real solution. I am going to buy the loft from you." He reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out a sleek black folder. He slid it across my desk next to the untouched coffee cup. "I will pay you fair market value," he declared. He named a precise dollar figure. I did not touch the black folder. I processed the number he just dropped into the space between us. It was accurate. It matched the recent closing costs for comparable units in my building over the last quarter. For one brief, fleeting second, a tiny crack appeared in my armor. My mind entertained the possibility that I was wrong about his motives. Maybe the dented rental car Gary drove was just a bizarre coincidence. Maybe Trent actually possessed the capital he constantly bragged about at our agonizing Sunday dinners. If he bought the loft outright, it would sever my financial ties to my toxic family forever. I could take the cash, buy a quiet place in the suburbs, and never attend another forced holiday gathering again. The offer looked like a golden escape hatch. It looked like a clean break. But risk analysts do not survive their careers by trusting aesthetic presentations. We survive by demanding the receipts. The math in my head started grinding against his flawless, confident presentation. "That is a very generous offer," I noted, keeping my voice flat and unreadable. "Which lending institution is underwriting the mortgage?" The bright smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A micro-expression of annoyance twitched near his left eye. He recovered quickly, smoothly transitioning into a relaxed, confident posture. "We are not using traditional banking channels, Tegan. Traditional banks are archaic. They move too slow. My portfolio is much more dynamic than that." "I see," I replied. "So you are buying the property in cash. Which escrow company should I send my title documents to?" He adjusted his watch strap, sliding the heavy metal up his wrist. It was a classic nervous tell. He started throwing out vocabulary designed to confuse amateur investors and impress easily swayed relatives. "I am leveraging a syndicated private equity pool," he explained, his voice gaining artificial volume. "It is a friends and family round, mixed with some agile capital from silent partners in Dallas. We are keeping the asset acquisition pre-revenue to maximize the tax deferment. Once the capital clears the holding company, we will structure a seller finance note for the interim period." He stopped talking and looked at me, expecting to see pure awe. He expected me to be intimidated by the wall of Wall Street jargon. He thought the glorified bank teller would nod her head, pretend to grasp the concepts, and sign whatever paper he put in front of her. My brain translated the jargon instantly. Syndicated private equity meant he had zero institutional backing. Friends and family rounds meant he was begging acquaintances for loose cash. Agile capital meant he was trying to float a check he could never actually cover. A seller-financed note meant he wanted me to hand over the legal deed today while he promised to pay me back in imaginary monthly installments drawn from a non-existent business account tomorrow. He was not offering to buy my loft. He was asking me to give him my unencumbered asset so he could use it as collateral for his own mounting debts. The fair market value figure was just bait to get my signature on a transfer document. I slid the black folder back across the desk until it touched his knuckles. I require a certified proof of funds letter from a recognized insured institution before I entertain real estate negotiations, I stated. Have your Agile Capital partners fax it directly to my legal department. Trent stared at me. The charming mask slipped, revealing something cold, sharp, and desperate underneath. He grabbed the folder and stood up. His chair scraped harshly against the commercial carpet. You are making a huge mistake, Tegan. I am trying to save your relationship with your family. I am offering you an out. You are too stubborn to take it. He turned and walked away, skipping the bright pleasantries with my colleagues on his way to the elevator bank. I watched the heavy glass doors close behind his tailored suit. The air in my cubicle felt cleaner. The iced coffee melted on my desk, forming a puddle of condensation on the laminate wood. I picked up a pen and started tapping it against my legal pad. The puzzle pieces shifted, locking into a terrifying new configuration. Trent was desperate. A man with genuine elite financial backing does not spend his Wednesday afternoon trying to hustle a mid-level bank employee out of a single piece of residential real estate. A legitimate venture capitalist does not need to structure a seller-financed note to acquire a basic downtown loft. He needed my property. He needed it badly enough to send Brenda and Gary to my door first. He needed it badly enough to walk into a federal bank and attempt a paper con on a woman he clearly despised. The question was no longer about his arrogance or his fake watch. The question was about his survival. I stared at the blank monitor screen. If Trent has syndicated private equity backing and silent partners pouring money into his businesses, why does he need my specific loft? The iced coffee Trent left on my desk went straight into the trash can. The ice clattered against the plastic lining. I wiped the condensation from my laminate desktop using a paper towel. My hands were perfectly steady. The adrenaline spike from our confrontation had passed, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. I pulled my keyboard closer and opened a fresh browser window. I did not need to access my bank's restricted databases to dissect a man like Trent. Men who speak in buzzwords always leave their fingerprints in the public domain. You just need to know which cabinets to open. His full name is Trenton Caldwell. Cassidy brought him to Sunday dinner 8 months ago. She usually dated aspiring musicians or guys trying to launch fitness applications. Cassidy loved potential. She loved men she could fix. But Trent arrived presenting himself as a finished masterpiece. He brought a bottle of scotch that cost more than my first car. He wore cashmere sweaters and talked about yield curves over dessert. Brenda treated him like visiting royalty. Gary, usually skeptical of anyone who did not work with their hands, fell under the spell after Trent spent an hour admiring my father's truck. They bought the packaging. I buy the data. I navigated to the Oklahoma Secretary of State Business Registry. The search bar blinked, waiting for a query. I typed Trenton Caldwell into the field and hit enter. The database churned for 3 seconds before spitting out a list of corporate entities. The results were a masterclass in financial camouflage. The first entity listed was Caldwell Enterprise Partners. This was the flagship company Trent constantly bragged about during family gatherings. The status column next to the company name did not say active, it said dissolved. The state had forcibly closed the business 18 months ago because Trent failed to file basic annual tax returns. I clicked on the registered agent history. The address listed was a mail drop location in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. There was no downtown office, there were no employees. I scrolled down the list. Apex Dynamic Solutions, status dissolved. Caldwell Holdings, LLC, status suspended. He operated using a textbook saw pattern. A saw pattern happens when a fraudster opens a shell company, raises capital or incurs debt, drains the accounts, and then lets the state dissolve the entity for non-compliance. Then they move one town over and open a new shell company with a slightly different name. The jagged peaks and valleys on a chart look like the teeth of a saw. It is a structure designed entirely for evasion. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Trent mentioned silent partners in Dallas during his failed negotiation. Dallas meant Texas. I pulled up the Dallas County Civil Court docket. I entered his name again. The page populated with a terrifying cascade of civil litigation. There were 5 separate breach of contract lawsuits filed against Trent and Caldwell over the last 4 years. I opened the first judgment. The plaintiff was an independent electrical supply company. Trent owed them $22,000 for materials delivered to a job site. The court ruled in favor of the supply company, but the judgment remained uncollected. I opened the next file. A plumbing subcontractor sued him for $14,000. A local lumber yard won a default judgment for $9,000. I read the names of the plaintiffs and a cold fury settled in my stomach. These were not venture capitalists. These were working-class small business owners. These were men who drove the exact same kind of trucks my father drove. Trent did not fleece wealthy investors in private equity pools. He stole drywall wiring and plumbing fixtures from people who needed those paychecks to feed their own kids. He wore a custom-tailored suit paid for by the sweat of stiff tradesmen. I needed to see his professional credentials. I switched tabs and logged into the state licensing board. If you claim to build custom lifestyle brands and manage high-end residential real estate, you need a license. I searched the registry. The system returned a hit for his general contractor certification. A bright red banner stretched across the top of his profile. The license was revoked 2 years ago. I downloaded the disciplinary file and read the administrative findings. Trent and Caldwell accepted a $40,000 upfront cash deposit from a young couple to remodel their kitchen. He demolished their existing walls, gutted their plumbing, and then vanished. He abandoned the job site, left his tools on the floor, and stopped answering his phone. The state board investigated, found him guilty of gross negligence, and stripped his credentials. He was legally forbidden from operating a construction business anywhere in the region. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the glowing monitors. The illusion was gone. The handsome venture capitalist courting my sister was a mirage. He was a predator drowning in civil judgments and unpaid debts. The fair market price he offered me an hour ago was a phantom. He never had the capital to buy my loft. He did not have agile capital. He did not have silent partners. He had empty pockets and a trail of victims. The true motive behind his sudden obsession with my downtown apartment clicked into place. If you possess a credit report riddled with unpaid judgments and revoked licenses, traditional lending institutions will throw you out of the lobby. No bank on earth would underwrite a mortgage for Trent and Caldwell. But if you hold the legal deed to a pristine, unencumbered piece of real estate, you do not need a traditional bank. You can approach a private hard money lender. Hard money lenders do not care about your credit score. They only care about the collateral. If Trent convinced me to hand over the title to my loft, he could use my home as collateral to secure a high-interest cash loan. He would take the cash and funnel it into his next fake business venture. When his new company inevitably collapsed, he would simply stop making payments on the loan. The private lender would foreclose on the collateral. They would seize my apartment to cover the debt. Trent would walk away with the cash. I would lose my home. Cassidy would be left with a bankrupt husband. It was a brilliant, vicious strategy. He was looking for a sacrificial lamb to fund his next escape. I closed the court dockets and minimized the state registries. The sheer scale of his deception was chilling, but it was a familiar kind of evil. My job trains me to expect predators. I am not surprised when a shark bites. I expect fraudsters to commit fraud. What stopped my heart was the other side of the equation. Trent was a charismatic grifter who manipulated my naive younger sister. That made logical sense. Cassidy always fell for the shiny exterior. She lacked the critical thinking skills required to look past a nice watch and a smooth compliment. But Gary Thompson was not a naive teenage girl. My father spent his entire life working on factory floors and construction sites. He possessed a ruthless radar for lazy men. He spent my entire childhood preaching the value of hard work, financial independence, and paying your own way. He hated people who asked for handouts. He prided himself on his self-reliance. He built his identity on the fact that he never owed a dime to anyone. Brenda was equally proud. She valued social standing above oxygen. She guarded our family reputation with ruthless efficiency. She would rather starve in secret than let the church group know she missed a credit card payment. My parents were flawed people. They were harsh, demanding, and emotionally transactional. But they were not stupid. Yet 48 hours ago, Gary and Brenda stood in my living room demanding that I surrender my most valuable asset to a man who had no job, no license, and a dozen lawsuits pending against him. They did not ask politely. They threatened to disown me. They acted as the tip of Trent's spear. They served as his enforcers. A con artist with no money cannot buy loyalty. He has to leverage it. I stared at the black screen of my locked phone. My father drove a dented rental car. My mother was deploying a smear campaign to isolate me from the extended family. They were executing Trent's commands with the desperation of hostages. Trent is a con artist. The paperwork proves it. He leaves behind ruined lives and empty bank accounts wherever he goes. I understand his motive perfectly. He wants my equity to fund his next lie. But how did a broke, disgraced contractor convince Gary and Brenda Thompson to do his dirty work? What kind of leverage could possibly force my proud father to act as an errand boy for a thief? The question hung in the recycled air of my cubicle. How did a disgraced contractor convince my proud father to do his bidding? I closed the tabs containing Trent's ruined history. I opened a fresh window and typed in the URL for the Tulsa County Clerk's Property Records Division. Auditing strangers is easy. You look at the data without emotional attachment. Auditing your own family feels like picking a lock on your childhood bedroom. I had never looked into my parents' financial standing before today. I never needed to. Gary and Brenda Thompson made their fiscal responsibility a core personality trait. Growing up, they treated debt like a moral failure. My father worked double shifts at the manufacturing plant to ensure we never carried a credit card balance. My mother kept a strict ledger tracking every penny spent on groceries and school supplies. When I was 20 years old, they paid off the final installment of the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage on our suburban ranch house. Gary threw a barbecue in the backyard to celebrate. I remember the smell of burning charcoal and cheap hot dogs. He stood on the patio, raised a domestic beer, and literally set the final bank statement on fire using a butane lighter. He told the gathered neighbors that a man who owns his own roof bows to no one. That was 12 years ago. Their house was supposed to be a fortress. I entered their address into the public search bar and hit the enter key. The system generated a list of recorded documents attached to the parcel. I expected to see the original deed from the 1990s and the release of lien from the barbecue. Instead, the database populated a third row. The document type read, Deed of Trust. The recording date stamped on the far right column was from exactly 6 months ago. My mouth went dry. A deed of trust is a security instrument. It means the property owner pledged their real estate as collateral for a loan. I clicked the hyperlink to view the scanned PDF. The image loaded slowly, line by line. I read the name of the lender first. It was not a local credit union. It was not a reputable national bank. The lender was a regional subprime outfit notorious for underwriting high-risk loans at predatory interest rates. People only go to this specific company when traditional institutions turn them away. I scrolled down to the principal amount. The number printed on the page hit me like a physical blow. They had extracted 80% of the home's appraised value. It was a staggering sum. I checked the origination date again. November. My mind replayed the events of last autumn. November was the month Trent proposed to Cassidy. He rented out a rooftop restaurant downtown, hired a string quartet, and presented her with a diamond ring that caught the light from every angle. Brenda posted 75 photos of the event on social media, bragging about her daughter's fairy tale future. I stared at the digitized signature on the bottom of the county form. Gary's familiar, slanted handwriting sat next to Brenda's precise cursive. They signed their fortress away the same week Cassidy said yes. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together, forming a devastating picture. The catering, the dress, the rooftop proposal, the designer handbags Cassidy flaunted all winter, none of it came from Trent's imaginary private equity pool. My parents funded the illusion. But the sum on the subprime loan was too large to just cover wedding expenses. You do not leverage the entire equity of a 4-bedroom house to pay for a florist and a photographer. The math did not balance. I pulled up a digital calculator on my monitor and started running amortization schedules. Factoring in the predatory interest rate charged by the subprime lender, the monthly payment on that new mortgage would easily consume my father's entire pension. It would eat Brenda's Social Security check. There would be nothing left for groceries, utilities, or car payments. That is why the custom Ford truck vanished. Gary could not afford the auto loan anymore. The bank repossessed his prized possession because he was quietly drowning in toxic debt. They did not just pay for a wedding, they bankrolled Trent's lifestyle. The grifter found the perfect marks. He targeted a couple desperate for social validation and a daughter trained to ignore red flags. Trent likely pitched them a guaranteed investment opportunity. He probably used the same agile capital buzzwords he tried on me, promising a massive return if they supplied the seed money. Gary and Brenda, wanting to secure their status as the parents of a wealthy tech mogul, handed over their life savings. When the liquid cash ran out, Trent convinced them to tap the house. They mortgaged their past to fund a fraudster's future. Now, 6 months later, the money is gone. Trent's fake businesses are dissolved. He is dodging process servers and chasing new marks. And my parents are trapped. They are staring down a monthly payment they cannot afford, attached to a subprime lender who will gladly foreclose on their retirement home the minute a check bounces. A sharp wave of pity washed over me, followed instantly by a cold, stabilizing anger. I remembered the way my father pointed his finger at my chest in my own living room. I remembered the venom in my mother's voice when she told me Cassidy deserved my apartment more than I did. They were not acting out of malice alone. They were acting out of pure, unadulterated panic. Trent squeezed them dry. The well in the suburbs was empty, so he pointed them toward the only unencumbered asset left in the family radius, my downtown loft. He sent them to my door because he needed fresh equity to steal. He knew I would never give him the time of day, but he figured I might cave to the people who raised me. He outsourced the extortion to the victims he already bankrupted. I leaned my elbows on the desk and buried my face in my hands. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed a steady, monotonous note. The reality of the situation settled into my bones. My family was ruined. The financial stability they bragged about for decades was a lie. They were tethered to a sinking ship, and instead of cutting the rope, they decided to throw me overboard to buy themselves another hour above water. I dropped my hands and looked back at the glowing screen. The timeline made sense. The desperation made sense. The fake offer Trent brought to my office made sense. But one crucial variable remained unresolved. If Gary and Brenda are flat broke and Trent is planning to leverage my loft for his own shady hard money loan, how does taking my apartment actually save my parents? Trent taking my equity does not pay off their subprime mortgage. It only lines his pockets. My parents are smart enough to realize that giving away a second family home does not erase the debt on the first one. They cannot live in the loft. Cassidy wants it for her marital aesthetic. Trent wants it for collateral. So what did Trent promise my parents in exchange for securing my signature? Why are they fighting so hard to steal my home when it will not cure their own bankruptcy? What is their actual endgame here? The glaring screen of my monitor held the brutal truth about my parents' subprime mortgage. My finger hovered over the mouse, ready to close the county property database. The sharp ringing of my cell phone shattered the quiet of my cubicle. The caller ID flashed my sister Cassidy. She had not called me directly in 6 months, usually preferring passive-aggressive text messages. I let it ring 3 times, observing the digital display before pressing the green accept button. "Tegan, you need to get to Tulsa Medical Center right now," Cassidy shrieked. Her voice was pitched high, trembling with manufactured panic. "Mom collapsed. Her heart is failing. The doctors say it is a stress-induced cardiac event." I did not gasp. I did not drop the phone. My heart maintained its steady rhythm. "Which room number?" I asked, keeping my tone flat and professional. Cassidy choked out a sob. "Room 412. Just hurry. She keeps asking for you." She hung up, leaving a dial tone echoing against my ear. I lowered the phone. A stress-induced cardiac event is a very specific medical term. It is not something a panicked daughter blurts out naturally. It sounds like a phrase lifted directly from an internet search or dictated by a clever scriptwriter. I locked my computer terminal, grabbed my purse, and walked to the elevator bank. The drive to the hospital took 20 minutes. Navigating the heavy afternoon traffic along the broken concrete of the interstate, I dug into my memory. Brenda possessed a long, documented history of weaponizing her health to manipulate the people around her. When I was 16 and received an academic scholarship to a summer program out of state, she developed mysterious, crippling migraines that required me to stay home and care for her. When Gary wanted to take a fishing trip with his brothers, she would suddenly suffer from severe vertigo until he canceled his flight. Sickness was her preferred currency when authority failed. It forced her targets to abandon logic and operate entirely on guilt. I parked in the visitor structure and walked through the sliding glass doors of the main entrance. The hospital smelled of harsh industrial bleach and stale coffee. I bypassed the front desk and took the elevator to the fourth-floor cardiology wing. The squeak of my flats against the polished linoleum echoed down the sterile hallway. I found room 412 and paused outside the heavy wooden door. I did not rush in. I stood in the hallway and listened. I expected to hear the frantic beep of a telemetry monitor or the hushed, urgent voices of medical professionals. Instead, I heard silence. A nurse walked past me, carrying a clipboard, humming a quiet tune under her breath. There was no code blue, there was no emergency. I pushed the door open. The scene inside was arranged with the precision of a stage play. Brenda lay in the hospital bed, propped up on 3 pillows. She wore a faded hospital gown, looking pale and frail. An intravenous line snaked into the back of her hand, delivering clear saline fluid. Gary sat in a vinyl chair by the window, staring grimly at the floor. He looked like a man attending a funeral. Cassidy perched on the edge of the mattress, dabbing her eyes with a crumpled tissue. Her crying was loud, but her mascara remained flawless. "Tegan, you came," Brenda whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. Her voice was raspy, weak, and entirely hollow. I stepped further into the room, but I kept a safe distance from the bed. I did not reach for her hand. I looked at the electronic monitor bolted to the wall above her head. Her heart rate read a steady 72 beats per minute. Her blood oxygen level was 99%. Her blood pressure fell squarely within a normal, healthy range. The machines told the truth. "The doctor said the stress is too much for her," Cassidy scolded, glaring at me over her tissue. "Her heart cannot take this kind of family division. You did this to her." Gary lifted his head. His eyes were hard, unforgiving chips of flint. "We raised you better than this," he muttered. "We gave you everything. Now you are putting your mother in an early grave over a piece of property?" The sheer audacity of the setup was breathtaking. They were using a hospital room as a negotiation table. They expected the smell of antiseptic and the sight of an intravenous tube to bypass my logical brain. They wanted me terrified. A terrified daughter signs anything to save her mother. I looked back at Brenda. She let her hand drop to the blanket, sighing heavily. "This fighting is tearing my soul apart, Tegan," she rasped, pressing a hand over her chest. "I just want peace. I want our family to be whole again. Please, just sign the apartment over to your sister. Do it for the sake of my heart. Let me see my girls happy before I go." A cold knot of disgust tightened in my stomach. She was literally equating a real estate transfer to a life-saving medical procedure. I was about to point out that her heart monitor showed the resting pulse of an elite athlete, but before I could speak, a movement in the far corner of the room caught my eye. Trent stepped out from the shadows near the small, narrow closet. I had not noticed him when I walked in. He stood leaning against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. He did not look worried. He did not look like a man watching his future mother-in-law fight for her life. He looked incredibly bored. While Brenda was delivering her raspy deathbed plea, Trent shifted his weight, pulled back the cuff of his tailored suit jacket, and checked his heavy rose gold watch. He tapped his foot impatiently. The performance was running long, and he had places to be. The entire charade snapped into sharp focus. Trent orchestrated this. He knew my parents were drowning under the subprime mortgage he forced them to take. He knew they were desperate. He told them that emotional blackmail was the only way to crack my defenses. He wrote the script, directed the actors, and stood in the corner to ensure they hit their marks. I turned my attention back to my mother. The weakness in her eyes vanished for a fraction of a second, replaced by a sharp, calculating gaze waiting for my surrender. "You want me to cure a cardiac event with a real estate deed?" I asked, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. Brenda blinked, her facade cracking slightly. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the fact that your vitals are perfect, Mom. I am talking about the fact that you are occupying a hospital bed and utilizing emergency resources to run a cheap financial shakedown." I looked at Gary. "And you are sitting there letting her do it because you are both too terrified to admit you are broke." Gary shot out of his vinyl chair, his hands balled into tight fists. "Watch your mouth," he warned, taking a heavy step toward me. I did not flinch. I pointed a finger at Trent, who suddenly looked very interested in the ceiling tiles. "You are leveraging your own health to steal my home for him?" I said, staring directly at Brenda. "A man with dissolved companies and revoked licenses. A man who already drained your equity and is now coming for mine." Cassidy gasped, dropping her tissue. Her face flushed an angry red. "How dare you talk about Trent like that?" I ignored my sister. I kept my eyes locked on Brenda. The frail, sick mother routine dissolved completely. She sat up straight in the hospital bed, the raspy voice replaced by a venomous hiss. "You owe this family," she spat, gripping the blanket. "You have too much. We need that property. You will sign it over to us, or I swear to God, Tegan, you are dead to me." The threat hung in the sterile air. It was the most honest sentence she had spoken to me in a decade. "I will not sign away my home under duress," I replied, my tone as calm as a bank vault. "I suggest you check out of this room before your insurance company flags the visit for fraud." I turned on my heel and walked out the door. The sound of Cassidy yelling echoed behind me, but I did not stop. I walked down the long corridor past the nurse's station and into the descending elevator. The metal doors closed, sliding shut on their pathetic theatrical display. I leaned against the stainless steel wall of the elevator box. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer toxic adrenaline of the encounter. The guilt trip failed. The medical extortion failed. I had looked them in the eye and denied them the prize. But as the elevator descended toward the ground floor, a dark realization settled over my mind. They were out of options. They could no longer rely on manipulation, shame, or staged emergencies. They needed that deed to save themselves from the subprime lender breathing down their necks. Desperate people do not walk away when you tell them no. They just change their tactics. If they could not manipulate me into giving them the title, they would find a way to take it without my permission. With emotional extortion failing entirely, how far will my family go to force my hand? Thursday morning arrived with a low gray sky and a steady Tulsa downpour. I sat at my desk watching raindrops trace jagged paths down the reinforced glass of the office tower. The weather mirrored the cold, calculating hum inside my head. After walking out of that staged hospital room, I did not sleep. I spent the night mapping out every possible vulnerability in my financial footprint. I checked my credit bureaus. I reviewed my tax filings. I scrutinized every digital lock I had engaged. My father Gary used to obsess over identity theft when I was a teenager. He bought a heavy-duty crosscut shredder and kept it humming in our home office. He refused to throw away so much as a grocery receipt without running it through the steel blades first. "A person has nothing if they lose their good name," he would lecture, holding up a pulverized bank statement. "Thieves are always looking for an unlocked door, Tegan. You have to guard your numbers like they are your life." The irony sat bitter on my tongue. The man who taught me to fear invisible thieves was now actively harboring a con artist in his own living room. He was holding the door open for the wolf. At 9:30, my desktop telephone did not ring. My email inbox did not ping. Instead, a shadow fell across my keyboard. I looked up. David stood outside my cubicle. He was the senior fraud prevention specialist who helped me lock down my accounts 2 days earlier. He held a manila folder tight against his chest. He did not smile. In the compliance division, we communicate severity through protocol. If an issue is minor, you send a chat message. If it requires documentation, you write an email. If a colleague physically walks to your desk holding paper, it means a catastrophic perimeter breach just occurred. "We need to use a secure room," David said, his voice pitched barely above a whisper. I locked my terminal and followed him down the carpeted aisle. We entered a small, windowless conference room designed for confidential client audits. David shut the heavy door, hearing the magnetic latch engage. He placed the manila folder on the polished mahogany table and flipped it open. "Someone tested your fences this morning," he stated, sliding a printed incident report toward me. I stared at the black ink on the white paper. The document detailed a customer service interaction logged at 8:14. A female caller dialed the primary retail banking hotline, David explained, taking a seat across from me. She navigated the automated voice system flawlessly. She typed your full 9-digit social security number into the keypad. She provided your date of birth, your mother's maiden name, and the street address of your downtown loft. She cleared the Tier 1 automated security gates without a single hesitation. My hands rested flat on the cool wood of the conference table. The caller had all my static data. That was not surprising. Brenda kept a locked filing cabinet in her suburban home containing copies of every birth certificate and tax return her children ever generated. She treated our personal information as family property. "What did she ask for?" I prompted, keeping my breathing shallow and controlled. David tapped a specific line on the printed transcript. She reached a live representative in the loan servicing department. The caller stated she was planning a sudden real estate transfer. She wanted to know the exact procedure for leveraging the equity in her primary residence to secure a short-term bridge loan. She specifically asked if the bank could expedite the underwriting process if the deed was transferred to a third-party holding company today. The sheer mechanical coldness of the strategy chilled me. Trent was not wasting any time. Having failed to extort me with Brenda's fake cardiac event, he pivoted immediately to theft. He handed my mother or my sister a script and ordered them to call my bank. He wanted to drain the equity from my home the exact second the title changed hands. "Did the representative flag the call?" I asked. David nodded, tapping the next line on the page. "The representative followed the updated protocol we established Tuesday. Because you flagged your profile as high risk, the system triggered a hard stop. The screen locked. The representative informed the caller that before they could discuss property liens or title transfers, she needed to provide the 12-character verbal alphanumeric password." A tight knot of tension uncoiled slightly in my chest. The random string of letters and numbers I generated was the only thing standing between my savings and my toxic relatives. "How did the caller respond?" I asked, leaning forward. "She panicked," David replied, a grim satisfaction creeping into his tone. "The transcript shows she stuttered. She tried to claim she forgot the code. She asked if the representative could send a verification link to an old email address. The representative declined and repeated the demand for the verbal password. The caller abruptly disconnected the line. The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I let out a slow, measured breath. The fortress held. The moat was deep enough. David leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "This crosses a major legal threshold, Tegan. We are no longer dealing with a domestic dispute over a piece of property. The person on that recording committed federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. They attempted to access a federally insured financial institution using stolen credentials. I have already preserved the audio file and logged the IP address of the routing node. We can hand this over to the authorities right now." I looked at the incident report. Turning this over to the police meant sending my own mother or my own sister to a federal holding cell. It meant handcuffs in the suburbs. It meant the total public destruction of the Thompson family name. A week ago, the thought would have made me sick with guilt. Today, it just felt like balancing a ledger. But I knew Trent was the architect. Brenda and Cassidy were just the blunt instruments he used to break the glass. If I called the authorities now, the police would arrest the women holding the hammer, while the man who handed it to them slipped out the back door. Trent would vanish, leaving my parents to face the prison sentence alone. I needed to trap the architect. "Not yet, David," I said, sliding the report back across the mahogany table. "I need to know the full scope of their operation before we involve law enforcement." David frowned, clearly uncomfortable with delaying a federal report. "They have your social security number, Tegan. They will not stop at a blocked phone call. Desperate people try alternative routes." He was right, and his warning triggered another piece of the puzzle. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. Yesterday I placed a fraud alert on my property profile with the county recording office. "David, if they tried to bypass the bank today, they might have tried to bypass the county clerk yesterday," I theorized. I dialed the direct extension for the recording supervisor I spoke to on Tuesday. The line rang twice before the woman answered. I identified myself and provided my secure verification details. I asked her if anyone had inquired about my downtown loft parcel over the last 24 hours. The supervisor's voice turned rigid and serious. Yes, Ms. Thompson, we received a highly irregular phone call late yesterday afternoon. A female caller claiming to be you asked for our daily filing deadline. My pulse drummed a steady beat against my temples. What did she want to file? I asked. The caller wanted to know if a notarized property transfer could be processed and recorded in the digital registry on the same day it was submitted, the supervisor explained. I informed her about the fraud alert on your parcel. I told her that any transfer document required you to be physically present in our office with government identification. Did she say what specific document she was holding? I pressed the edges of my vision narrowing to the polished wood of the conference table. The supervisor paused, rustling papers on her desk. She referred to it as a quitclaim deed. She asked if a kitchen table notary stamp would be sufficient to bypass the physical presence requirement. When I told her it would not, she hung up. I thanked the supervisor and ended the call. I set the phone down next to the manila folder. The air in the secure room felt thin. They had a quitclaim deed, a document designed to quickly transfer property ownership without the traditional guarantees of a warranty deed. It is the preferred instrument for fast, shady real estate transactions, and they were actively looking for a notary to stamp it. Trent knew he could not get my signature, so he decided to manufacture one. He was coaching my family on how to forge legal instruments. The phone calls were just reconnaissance missions, testing the defenses to see where they could slip the fake paperwork through the system. I looked at David. His face was pale, realizing the gravity of the situation. They are not just trying to convince me to leave my home, I told him, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. They are preparing to steal it on paper. I walked out of the conference room, leaving the incident report on the table. The rain continued to batter the glass tower outside. The conflict had mutated. This was no longer a battle over boundaries or hurt feelings. This was a calculated criminal conspiracy unfolding in real time. My family had crossed the Rubicon. I needed to see the paperwork they were holding. I needed to know the exact terms Trent drafted and which specific shell company he listed as the grantee. Most importantly, I needed to figure out who made the call and what document they were actually trying to file. I walked back to my desk from the secure conference room, carrying the weight of the incident report in my mind. The rain continued to wash down the reinforced glass of the office tower, blurring the Tulsa skyline into gray smudges. I needed concrete evidence of the exact legal instrument my family was attempting to file. I did not have to wait long. The evidence found me. Resting squarely on the center of my keyboard was a thick cardboard courier envelope. The red pull tab indicated priority overnight shipping. The return address, printed in block letters, belonged to a law firm I did not recognize. Calvin Reed, attorney at law. The physical address listed on the label was not a prestigious downtown high-rise. It mapped to a cheap strip mall in a neighboring suburb squeezed between a discount liquor store and a neglected laundromat. My hands moved with practiced precision. I gripped the red plastic tab and tore the cardboard open. A heavy stack of documents slid onto my desk. The paper was expensive linen stock designed to manufacture authority. People who lack actual power always overcompensate with expensive stationery. The top page was a cover letter, printed under a gaudy gold foil letterhead. The bold text centered at the top read, Family Harmony and Reconciliation Agreement. I read the paragraphs, slowly digesting the manipulation woven into every sentence. The letter did not read like a standard legal demand. It read like a ransom note drafted by a desperate therapist. It referenced a long-standing pattern of familial discord. It stated that the enclosed property transfer would serve as a permanent peace offering designed to mend broken trust and restore unity to the Thompson household. It explicitly promised that, upon execution of the attached deed, Gary and Brenda would drop any perceived grievances against their eldest daughter. They were trying to frame outright theft as a mutual emotional healing exercise. They wanted to steal my home and call it therapy. I slid the cover letter aside and focused on the primary instrument hidden beneath it. It was a standard Oklahoma quitclaim deed. This specific legal form is a rapid way to transfer property ownership because it offers zero warranties or guarantees to the buyer. It simply hands over whatever interest the seller holds immediately. It is the perfect tool for a fast, shady asset grab. I traced my finger down the page, scrutinizing the defined parties. The document listed me as the grantor. The grantee, the entity poised to receive my downtown loft, was not Cassidy. It was not Gary or Brenda. The grantee was listed as Vanguard Horizon LLC, a fresh shell company. Trent had been busy. After I exposed his dissolved corporate entities and his revoked construction license, he scrambled to build a new hiding place. He registered a brand new limited liability company to catch my equity. He insulated himself entirely. If the deed went through, Vanguard Horizon would own my apartment. Trent would control the company. My sister and my parents would have zero legal claim to the asset they fought so hard to steal for him. They were bankrupting themselves and committing federal fraud just to hand a grifter a free house, free and clear. I analyzed the fine print. To a layman or a frightened relative, this packet of paper would look terrifying. The dense paragraphs were packed with legal jargon, citing obscure state statutes and referencing binding arbitration clauses. It carried the menacing weight of official litigation. A naive person would look at the gold foil letterhead and the aggressive vocabulary and assume they had no choice but to surrender. But I am not a layman. I am a bank compliance officer. I read complex financial contracts for a living, and looking at this document through the lens of a forensic auditor, I realized it was a masterpiece of incompetence. Calvin Reed, the strip mall lawyer, clearly copy and pasted clauses from different boilerplate contracts without checking them for consistency. One paragraph claimed the transfer was a gift given out of love and affection. 3 paragraphs later, a different clause stated the transfer was a mandatory settlement of an unlisted financial debt. The document contradicted itself on the same page. It was a legally disastrous extortion attempt disguised as a formal contract. Any competent judge would look at this paperwork and throw it out of the courtroom before the lunch recess. But Trent did not plan on showing this to a judge. He only needed it to look official enough to fool a county clerk. My gaze drifted to the bottom of the final page. I stared at the signature block. There was a solid black line waiting for my name. Beneath that line was the standard juror at the block of text reserved for a licensed notary public to sign and stamp. A property deed in the state of Oklahoma is nothing but a worthless piece of paper until it is notarized. The county recording office will reject any transfer instrument that lacks that specific raised seal. The notary acts as the ultimate gatekeeper, verifying that the person signing the document is who they claim to be, and that they are signing the paper willingly without duress. The phone calls my mother made to the bank and the clerk's office verified my worst fears. They knew I would never willingly pick up a pen and sign my equity away to Vanguard Horizon LLC. They knew I possessed the financial literacy to see right through Trent's transparent hustle. The cover letter was just a weak attempt to create a paper trail of goodwill. They never actually intended for me to sign it. The delivery of this package was a distraction. Trent mailed it to my office to make me believe I still held the power of refusal. He wanted me to sit in my cubicle feeling smug about ignoring his amateur legal threat. He wanted my eyes focused on this specific envelope while his real plan moved forward in the shadows. Because while I sat here reading this copy, I knew Trent held the original document in his hands. A cold realization washed over my skin. I remembered the county clerk's warning about a kitchen table notary stamp. My family did not need my consent. They just needed a person holding a valid state commission willing to break the law. They needed a notary who valued personal relationships more than professional ethics. They needed someone willing to stamp a fraudulent signature and swear under oath that I stood in the room when the pen hit the paper. Growing up, Brenda surrounded herself with women who shared her rigid worldview. They met every Wednesday night in our living room, drinking weak tea and discussing the moral failings of the local community. They operated on a strict hierarchy of blind loyalty. If you belonged to their circle, your sins were ignored. If you stepped outside the circle, you were exiled. I knew every woman in that group by name. I knew their husbands, their children, and their secrets. I also knew that at least 3 of those women held active notary commissions for their jobs at local insurance agencies and car dealerships. Gary spent 40 years treating contracts like sacred vows. Now he was reduced to running interference for a man who viewed contracts as toilet paper. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain that illusion must have been suffocating my father. But fear makes proud men do pathetic things. Trent was setting a trap. He isolated me with the smear campaign. He failed the medical extortion. He failed the phone impersonation. Now he was bypassing me anywhere. The fraudulent deed was printed. The fake LLC was registered. The trap was fully constructed and the jaws were pulled back. The only thing missing was the ink. The deed requires a notarized signature to clear the county registry and trigger the subprime loan payout. If they know I will never willingly touch a pen, how do they plan to get my name on that line? And who in my mother's orbit is foolish enough to risk a prison sentence to provide the stamp? I sat in the quiet isolation of my cubicle, staring at the fraudulent transfer document. The courier envelope rested empty near my keyboard. The linen stock paper felt thick and substantial between my fingertips. Fraud leaves physical traces if you know where to look. Criminals always make mistakes when they are rushing. I leaned forward and angled the desk lamp downward. The bright halogen bulb cast a harsh white beam across the signature block. I hovered my face inches from the page, inspecting the blank line where my name was supposed to go. The printer ink was a stark, solid black, but just below the signature line inside the jurat box reserved for the state official, I noticed a faint indentation. It was a subtle disturbance in the texture of the expensive paper. I pulled a small magnifying glass from my top drawer. A compliance officer never ignores an anomaly. Through the convex lens, the indentation revealed its true form. Someone had lightly pressed a lead pencil into the margin and then hastily erased it before placing the document into the overnight mailer. Two faint letters remained visible in the microscopic grooves. D.P. I set the magnifying glass down. The letters were not a random scribble. They were a placeholder. Whoever drafted this document wanted to ensure the paperwork landed in the hands of a very specific individual. I opened a new browser tab and accessed the official Oklahoma Notary Public Digital Registry. Every commissioned individual in the state is logged in a searchable public database. I filtered the results by Tulsa County and typed the initials into the name field. The system returned several dozen results. I scrolled past the corporate lawyers, the paralegals, and the real estate brokers. My eyes stopped on a familiar name, Donna Peterson. My stomach performed a slow, uncomfortable roll. The sterile office environment faded away, replaced by the memory of my childhood living room. Donna Peterson was a soft-spoken woman who worked a quiet administrative job at a regional insurance brokerage. More importantly, she was Brenda's most loyal disciple. Every Wednesday evening, Donna sat on our floral sofa, balancing a porcelain teacup on her knee, hanging on to every word my mother spoke. Brenda held court and Donna provided the applause. Donna baked casseroles for sick neighbors and organized the holiday charity drives. She was a gentle, timid person who despised conflict and sought approval from stronger personalities. She practically worshipped my mother. If Brenda sat at a kitchen table weeping about a cruel daughter tearing the family apart, Donna would absorb that sorrow as her own. Donna would never question the legality of a situation if she believed she was performing an act of spiritual mercy. The horrifying mechanics of the crime snapped into perfect clarity. Trent did not need my consent. He did not need me to sit in a law office and surrender my property. He only needed a clean copy of the deed and a willing accomplice. He mailed this decoy package to my desk to keep me occupied. Meanwhile, he handed the actual original document to my parents. Right now, the original paperwork was likely sitting on my parents' dining room table. I pictured my father, Gary, retrieving my old high school yearbooks, my expired passports, and my old tax returns from his locked filing cabinet. He was supplying the exemplars. I pictured Brenda sitting under the warm glow of the chandelier, practicing the exact slope and loop of my handwriting. My own mother was studying my identity, preparing to steal it. She would trace my signature onto the blank line binding my financial future to Vanguard Horizon LLC. Once the forgery was complete, Brenda would invite Donna over for afternoon tea. She would present the signed document alongside a rehearsed performance of maternal grief. She would tell Donna that I was too busy or too hostile to appear in person, but that the family desperately needed this paperwork finalized to secure Cassidy's future. She would beg her best friend for a small, harmless favor. And Donna, wanting to heal a fractured family, would pull her official state seal from her purse. She would press the inked stamp onto the paper. She would sign her own name, validating the lie. She would swear under penalty of perjury that I stood in that suburban kitchen and willingly surrendered the deed to my home. Donna probably thought she was delivering a miracle. She had no idea she was facilitating a federal offense. A state commission holds immense power. A notary stamp transforms a worthless stack of paper into a legally binding directive. The moment Donna's ink dried on that page, the deed became a live weapon. Trent could take that stamped document, walk into the county recording office, and transfer the title. The subprime lender would see the recorded collateral and release the funds to his shell company. My equity would vanish into the ether, leaving me fighting a costly uphill legal battle against an anonymous corporate entity. The cold reality of the situation settled deep into my bones. My family was actively constructing a financial guillotine, and a trusted church friend was weaving the rope. I picked up my cell phone. My thumb hovered over the dial pad. My immediate instinct demanded action. I wanted to call Donna Peterson right now. I wanted to tell her she was being manipulated by a con artist and a pair of desperate, bankrupt liars. I wanted to warn her that participating in this scheme would cost her state, commission her job, and her freedom. I closed my eyes and forced my thumb away from the screen. Action driven by panic always results in failure. I am an auditor. I construct timelines. I predict human behavior. If I called Donna today, she would become terrified. Her first reaction would not be to call the police. Her first reaction would be to call Brenda. Donna would confess that I knew about the plan. Brenda and Trent would instantly realize the trap was compromised. They would strike a match and burn the forged document in the backyard fire pit. The physical evidence of their crime would turn to ash. The threat would retreat into the shadows, but it would not disappear. They would simply wait for me to drop my guard. They would find a different notary in a different town or forge a different instrument months from now. I would spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack on my assets. I cannot just disrupt the transaction. I have to destroy the mechanism permanently. To eliminate the threat, I need them to commit to the crime. I need them to forge the signature. I need Donna to apply the stamp. I need them to hold the physical proof of their own conspiracy. But I cannot let them file it. If the document reaches the county clerk, the damage becomes irreversible. The air in my cubicle felt heavy. I stared at the faint pencil mark on the linen paper. I was standing on a razor-thin wire. I had to let them build the bomb, but I had to cut the ignition cord before it detonated. I needed to corner them in a space where they could not deny their actions, where they could not destroy the paperwork, and where they could not escape the consequences. Tegan knows the method of the crime, but how can she expose it without them destroying the evidence? Friday morning brought a brittle, unyielding sunlight that baked the damp Tulsa streets. The storm had passed, leaving behind a humid, suffocating heat. I sat at my desk with my posture rigid. The physical evidence of my family's conspiracy, the forged deed draft, sat locked inside my bottom drawer. I knew Trent was waiting for Donna to apply her state seal to the original document. I had to let them finish building their trap before I triggered the release. But sitting still is counterintuitive to an auditor. When you discover one breach in a financial ecosystem, you never assume it is an isolated event. You comb the surrounding landscape for secondary fractures. I needed to guarantee that Trent had not utilized my personal information in any other obscure filings. I possessed an airtight perimeter around my bank accounts and my property title, but fraud is an inherently creative industry. Desperate men hide debt in creative places. I opened a secure portal to the State Commercial Registry. It is a public database aggregating business registrations, commercial liens, and secured transactions. I bypassed my own name and typed in the suburban address of my parents' house. I wanted to see if Trent had attached any mechanics liens or bogus contractor claims to the property Gary and Brenda had already mortgaged. The search engine processed the request. The screen populated with a short list of historical records. I saw the original deed from my childhood. I saw the subprime mortgage they executed 6 months ago. Below that entry, a third document caught my attention. It was a UCC financing statement. In the banking sector, we refer to this as a Uniform Commercial Code lien. When a lender issues a substantial personal or business loan, they file this public notice to declare their legal right to seize the borrower's assets if the debt goes unpaid. It is a digital flag planted in the ground, warning other creditors to stay away. The filing date was stamped just 3 months ago. I clicked the link to open the scanned image. I expected to see Trent's name listed as the primary debtor. I assumed he had used Gary and Brenda's address to secure another round of phantom capital. The document rendered on my screen. I read the name printed in the box labeled primary debtor. The name was Cassidy Thompson. My lungs forgot how to draw air. I pushed my chair back from the desk, the wheels rolling silently over the carpet. I stared at the bright monitor. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the edge of the laminate wood, reading the entry a second time. Cassidy was the debtor. I shifted my focus to the adjacent box labeled guarantors. The guarantors are the individuals who promise to assume the financial burden if the primary debtor defaults. 2 names were typed into that space: Gary Thompson and Brenda Thompson. I scrolled down to the section defining the secured party. The creditor was not a standard bank. It was a boutique alternative lending group based in Nevada known for underwriting unsecured personal loans at exorbitant interest rates. They cater specifically to high-risk individuals who cannot qualify for traditional financing. The principal amount of the loan was printed in bold black numbers: $80,000. My mind raced, processing the raw data, attempting to assemble the narrative behind the numbers. 3 months ago, Cassidy was spending her weekends touring luxury wedding venues and bragging on social media about booking a honeymoon resort in the Maldives. She was picking out imported floral arrangements and mocking my downtown loft as a starter home. She was doing all of that while legally chained to $80,000 of toxic debt. I pulled up a digital calculator and ran the amortization variables for an unsecured loan from that specific Nevada lender. The math was brutal. With the staggering interest rates applied, the monthly minimum payments would rival a luxury mortgage. If Cassidy missed a single installment, the penalties would compound, triggering a default that would instantly destroy her credit score for the next decade. The lender would then exercise their right to pursue the guarantors. They would come for whatever equity Gary and Brenda had left. The grifter had executed a masterstroke of financial manipulation. I pieced the timeline together. 6 months ago, Trent convinced Gary and Brenda to leverage their home equity to fund his fake venture capital firm. They handed him the cash. He burned through it. 3 months later, the money ran out and his creditors started circling again. He needed another injection of capital to maintain the illusion of success. My parents were tapped out. They had nothing left to mortgage. So Trent turned his predatory gaze toward the golden child. He approached Cassidy. He likely spun a glamorous tale about a temporary cash flow issue regarding his syndicated private equity pool. He probably told her he needed a short-term bridge loan to finalize a massive real estate acquisition. He framed it as a partnership. He asked her to sign the paperwork for a business loan, promising to pay it back tenfold before the wedding invitations even went out in the mail. Cassidy lacks the critical thinking skills to read a lending disclosure. She saw the expensive watch and the tailored suits. She wanted the lifestyle he promised. She picked up the pen and signed her name, assuming she was stepping into the role of a wealthy corporate wife. But the Nevada lender required guarantors. They saw Cassidy's modest income as a yoga instructor and demanded stronger backing. That is where the true horror of the document lived. Gary and Brenda co-signed the loan. My parents knew Trent was broke. They knew the first round of money they gave him had vanished into thin air. They were already drowning under the weight of their own subprime mortgage. They knew the agonizing financial pressure of feeding a black hole. Yet when Trent asked them to guarantee a high-risk loan in their youngest daughter's name, they agreed. They authorized the transaction. They watched Cassidy sign a document that chained her to $80,000 of predatory debt, and they picked up a pen and co-signed it. Growing up, Cassidy was the protected one. She was the dancer, the cheerleader, the daughter, who received relentless praise while I was handed chores and expectations. Brenda shielded her from every consequence. Gary treated her like porcelain. They spent her entire life insulating her from hardship. But the moment their own social standing was threatened, the moment the illusion of their wealthy future son-in-law began to crack, their protective instincts evaporated. They sacrificed their favorite child to appease a con man. They fed Cassidy to the wolf to buy themselves a few more months of pretending they were upper class. I looked at the date on the financing statement again. 3 months ago. Cassidy has no idea. If she understood the reality of this document, she would not be demanding my apartment. She would be experiencing a nervous breakdown. Trent lied to her. He probably intercepts the mail and manages the digital portals, ensuring she never sees the monthly statements. She genuinely believes she is marrying a millionaire. She is entirely oblivious to the fact that her pristine credit profile is currently holding up his crumbling empire. A strange hollow sensation bloomed in my chest. It was not triumph. It was not joy. It was a cold, dark pity. My sister stood in my living room on Tuesday night, tracing her manicured fingernail along my quartz countertop, smiling as my parents demanded I surrender my home to her. She thought she was the winner in our lifelong sibling rivalry. She thought she was claiming her rightful throne. She was actually standing in a burning house, demanding a nicer chair. I printed a hard copy of the UCC financing statement. The printer hummed, spitting out the physical proof of my family's ultimate betrayal. I picked up the warm sheets of paper and placed them inside a pristine blue folder. I set the folder next to the fraudulent deed they mailed me yesterday. The pieces on the chessboard had shifted entirely. Trent and my parents thought they held the tactical advantage. They believed they were orchestrating a brilliant, quiet theft of my real estate. They thought I was sitting in my office, feeling smug and safe, unaware of the kitchen table notary preparing to forge my signature. They had no idea I was watching their every move from a satellite feed. I looked at the blue folder. This document was a lethal weapon. It held the power to shatter the illusion Brenda fought so hard to protect. It held the power to destroy Gary's false pride. It held the power to reduce Cassidy's fairy tale wedding to a humiliating cautionary tale. If I showed this piece of paper to my sister, the wedding would implode instantly. She would realize the man she loved was a parasite and the parents she trusted were his accomplices. The entire family structure would collapse under the weight of the debt. I tapped my fingers against the laminate desk. The rhythm was slow and deliberate. I could send a text message right now. I could attach the PDF file and blow their world apart before the lunch hour. I could end the extortion attempt today. But a quiet voice inside my head, the voice of an auditor who despises unfinished business, whispered a different strategy. Dropping the bomb now would give Trent time to pack his bags and run. It would allow my parents to spin a new narrative, framing themselves as innocent victims of a misunderstanding. I needed to maximize the blast radius. I needed to wait for a moment where denial was impossible. I needed an audience. Tegan holds the power to destroy the wedding. When will she strike? I sat in my cubicle looking at the blue folder. The digital clock on my monitor read 2:15 in the afternoon. Time represented a critical vulnerability. Trent possessed the original unexecuted transfer instrument. Brenda possessed the capability to forge my handwriting. Donna Peterson possessed the state commission to validate the crime. If they finalized the fraudulent paperwork today, they could submit it to the county registry tomorrow morning. Once the title changed hands, Trent would secure his subprime payout and vanish into the ether. I had to freeze their timeline. I needed a tactic that would force them to halt their illicit operation and wait for my physical presence. In financial compliance, when you want a suspect to stop hiding records, you make them believe they already passed the inspection. You manufacture a false sense of victory. I picked up my cell phone. I needed to perform the most difficult acting exercise of my adult life. I had to sound defeated. Growing up, Brenda thrived on my apologies. She considered my submission to be her ultimate maternal achievement. Whenever I displayed independence, she punished me with icy silence until I crawled back asking for forgiveness. I knew the exact tonal frequency she required. I cleared my throat, lowered my shoulders, and dialed her number. The line rang 3 times. Brenda answered with a clipped, hostile greeting. "Yes, Tegan?" she snapped. I took a shallow breath, letting my voice waver intentionally. "Mom," I said, pitching my words soft and fragile, "I am calling because I made a mistake. I have been thinking about everything that happened at the hospital. I have been thinking about what Dad said." The silence on the other end of the line felt heavy. Brenda was assessing the sudden shift in my demeanor. I let a calculated pause stretch between us. I was being selfish, I continued, forcing the words through my teeth. You were right. Cassidy deserves a good start. I let my pride get in the way of our family. I received the package Trent sent to my office, the deed. I am ready to sign it. I heard a sharp intake of breath. The hostile edge in my mother's voice evaporated instantly, replaced by a sickening sweet warmth. "Oh, Tegan," she cooed, "I knew you would come to your senses. I told your father you just needed time to process the transition. Family always does the right thing in the end." I gripped the edge of my laminate desk. My knuckles turned white, but my tone remained entirely submissive. "I know, Mom," I murmured. "I want to make things right. I want to bring the paperwork to the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. I will have it signed and notarized by a professional downtown. I will hand it directly to Trent in front of everyone. It can be my official wedding gift to them." Brenda let out a small, triumphant laugh. "That is a beautiful idea, sweetheart," she declared. "Trent will be so relieved. He has been so stressed about securing a proper home for your sister. We will save a seat for you at the head table. Just make sure the notary stamp is clear. The county clerks can be very particular about the seal." I closed my eyes. She just confirmed she knew exactly how the recording process worked. She was verifying the mechanics of the crime while pretending to plan a family celebration. "I will make sure it is perfect, Mom, I promised. I will see you tomorrow night." I ended the call and placed the device face down. The bait was taken, the hook was set. By promising to deliver the executed document in a public setting, I removed their incentive to proceed with the forgery. Trent would rather receive a legitimate signature than risk a felony charge with a fake one. He would tell Brenda to hold off on calling Donna Peterson. The trap was paused. 10 minutes later, my phone screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. I had silenced the family group chat months ago, but I opened the application to monitor the fallout. Brenda sent a message to 24 relatives. The text read, "My girls are finally reunited. Tegan realized her errors and is gifting her property to Cassidy tomorrow night at the country club. A mother's prayers are always answered." The responses flooded the screen. Aunt Susan sent a row of praying hands emojis. Cousin Mark typed a message saying, "It was about time the spinster did something useful for the bloodline." Gary sent a single thumbs-up icon. Cassidy responded with a photograph of a champagne flute and a caption celebrating her new downtown real estate. Gary sending a thumbs-up icon felt like a quiet betrayal. This was a man who used to teach me how to check the oil in my first car and balance a checkbook. Now he was offering digital applause because his oldest child had supposedly capitulated to a con artist. He traded his integrity for a false sense of peace. Cassidy posting a champagne flute was equally tragic. She was toasting to a future built on quicksand. She thought she was ascending to a higher social class. She did not realize she was drinking a toast on a sinking ship, holding a ticket purchased with a predatory loan. I scrolled through the digital parade of unearned victory. They were celebrating a surrender that never happened. They were dividing the spoils of a war they had already lost. They dropped their guard entirely. In their minds, the rebellious daughter was broken. The compliance officer was just an obedient bank teller again. They thought the rehearsal dinner would be a coronation for Trent and a public humiliation for me. I locked my phone and opened my bottom desk drawer. I retrieved the thick blue folder containing the public records. I needed to prepare for the dinner. Auditors do not engage in shouting matches. We do not throw wine or stage dramatic exits. We rely on documentation. I walked to the supply closet and gathered a heavy-duty 3-ring portfolio, a set of plastic sheet protectors, and a pack of color-coded index tabs. I returned to my cubicle and began assembling the architecture of their ruin. The first section received a red tab. I inserted the printed dockets detailing the 5 separate civil judgments against the groom. I included the administrative ruling that stripped his contractor license. This established his true identity as a serial predator. The second section received a yellow tab. I placed the county property records showing the subprime mortgage on the suburban ranch house. I highlighted the 80% equity draw and the predatory interest rate. This proved my parents were broke and desperate. The third section received a stark white tab. I slid the Uniform Commercial Code financing statement into the plastic sleeve. the document proving the bride was the primary debtor on an $80,000 high-interest personal loan guaranteed by our bankrupt parents. This was the lethal blow to the fairy tale illusion. The final section received a black tab. I inserted the fraudulent instrument Calvin Reed mailed to me along with the incident report David generated regarding the identity theft phone call. This demonstrated the criminal conspiracy they utilized to try and steal my home. I snapped the metal ring shut. The portfolio was heavy. It contained the entire hidden history of the Thompson family. Every lie, every debt, every act of extortion was documented, dated, and verified by state and federal authorities. I ran my hand over the smooth black vinyl cover. Friday night at the country club, Trent expected me to hand him a piece of paper granting him salvation. He expected to stand in front of his wealthy local investors and present my home as his own corporate asset. Brenda expected to watch me bow my head in submission. They built a stage for a tragedy. They invited the audience. They wrote the script. They just forgot to verify the lead actress. I placed the portfolio into my leather briefcase and fastened the brass buckles. The storm outside began to clear, leaving the city skyline sharp and defined against the late afternoon sky. I packed my belongings and rode the elevator down to the lobby. The false peace in my family would last exactly 24 more hours. The family thinks they have won. What is Tegan actually bringing to the dinner? Friday evening draped a warm, heavy humidity over the Tulsa hills. The Oak Ridge Country Club sat at the end of a winding private drive flanked by ancient elm trees and manicured golf greens. I parked my sedan in the overflow lot, avoiding the valet stand. I retrieved my leather briefcase from the passenger seat. The brass hardware felt cool against my palms. I did not wear a floral dress or a pastel evening gown. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer, crisp trousers, and polished leather loafers. I dressed for a forensic audit. I pulled open the heavy mahogany double doors of the banquet hall. The visual contrast between the elegance of the room and the financial rot funding it was dizzying. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over 30 circular tables. Tall centerpieces featuring imported white orchids dominated the room. A string quartet played a soft classical symphony in the far corner. Waitstaff wearing crisp white aprons circulated with silver trays of expensive appetizers. Every single detail, the shrimp cocktails, the velvet chair covers, the pristine floral arrangements, represented another month of compounding interest added to the hidden ledger. They were throwing a lavish party on the deck of a sinking ship. I paused at the entrance, letting my eyes adjust to the lighting. The extended family noticed me immediately. Aunt Susan caught my gaze and offered a slow, condescending nod, a silent approval of my supposed surrender. Cousin Mark raised his imported beer bottle in a mocking salute. They looked at me and saw a broken woman walking in to pay her toll. They saw a rebellious daughter finally brought to heel. Brenda rushed across the patterned carpet. She wore a beaded emerald gown that she certainly could not afford. She reached out and gripped my forearm, her manicured nails digging into the fabric of my blazer. "Tegan, you made it," she whispered, her voice dripping with artificial grace. "We are so proud of you for doing the right thing tonight. Your sister is glowing." I looked past my mother's shoulder. Cassidy sat near the center of the room, surrounded by her bridesmaids. She looked like royalty, holding a crystal flute, laughing at a joke someone just told. She flashed her diamond ring under the chandelier light, talking loudly about booking a luxury resort in the Maldives for her honeymoon. She was entirely oblivious to the financial guillotine suspended above her neck. Gary stood near the private bar. My father wore a dark suit that hung slightly loose on his frame. He held a glass of bourbon, staring into the amber liquid. Despite his forced smile, deep dark circles shadowed his eyes. He looked aged, hollowed out by the suffocating weight of the subprime mortgage he carried in secret. He noticed me looking at him and quickly averted his gaze, pretending to study the cocktail menu. The shame radiating from his posture was palpable. I scanned the rest of the room and located the real reason Trent demanded this ostentatious venue. A cluster of 5 older men stood near the head table. They wore bespoke suits and carried the distinct, relaxed posture of men who held actual wealth. These were local commercial developers and established business owners. These were the fresh marks Trent was grooming for his next phantom capital raise. Trent held court in the center of their circle. He wore a sharp tuxedo, tailored to emphasize his shoulders. He laughed loudly, patting a silver-haired developer on the back, exuding the charm of a successful entrepreneur. He noticed me standing near the entrance. He paused his conversation and flashed a predatory, victorious grin. He thought he had secured the ultimate prize. He believed the briefcase in my hand contained the unencumbered deed to my downtown real estate, ready to serve as collateral for his impending loans. I found my assigned seat near the back of the room. I placed the briefcase on the floor, resting it against my ankle. I drank ice water and kept my hands folded on the white linen tablecloth. I watched the machinery of the con operate in real time. The evening progressed through a multi-course dinner. Plates of filet mignon and roasted asparagus arrived and departed. The wine flowed freely, dulling the senses of the guests. I remained silent, observing the subtle dynamics of the room. Trent spent the entire meal rotating between the tables of his wealthy guests, ignoring the extended family almost entirely. He poured their wine, asked about their golf handicaps, and dropped calculated buzzwords about dynamic growth and emerging markets. He was laying the groundwork, selling them the illusion of his non-existent empire. When the waitstaff cleared the dessert plates, the ambient noise in the hall began to settle. Trent stood up from the head table. He picked up a silver spoon and tapped it lightly against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound cut through the remaining chatter. The string quartet stopped playing. The room fell into a hushed, expectant silence. Trent buttoned his tuxedo jacket and smiled at the crowd. His performance was flawless. He possessed the magnetic charisma of a practiced grifter. Family and friends, he began, his voice projecting smoothly across the banquet hall. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the merging of two wonderful families. But tonight is about more than just a wedding. It is about vision. It is about legacy. It is about building a foundation that will last for generations. He gestured toward the cluster of wealthy developers sitting at a prominent table near the front. I look around this room and I see builders. I see men who understand what it takes to construct an empire. Success does not happen in a vacuum. It requires mutual support. It requires individuals willing to put the needs of the collective enterprise above their own selfish desires. Trent pivoted smoothly, turning his attention toward the Thompson family tables. Brenda dabbed her eyes with a napkin, performing her role perfectly. Gary stared at the tablecloth. Loyalty is the true currency of success, Trent declared, raising his glass. And tonight, my future sister-in-law is demonstrating the ultimate definition of familial devotion. She understands the vision Cassidy and I are building. She knows that a strong corporate structure requires prime assets. He looked directly at me, his eyes locking onto mine. He was pulling the trigger. He wanted to use my real estate transfer as proof of his liquidity in front of the local investors. He intended to legitimize Vanguard Horizon LLC using my public surrender. Tegan, he called out, extending his free hand toward me. Please come up here. Present the document that will serve as the cornerstone of our new venture. Let everyone see what true family support looks like. The applause started immediately. Aunt Susan clapped the loudest, her jewelry rattling. The extended family joined in, creating a wave of polite, encouraging noise. The wealthy investors clapped respectfully, turning in their chairs to watch the transaction unfold. I did not smile. I did not rush. I reached down and unsnapped the brass buckles of my leather briefcase. The sharp, metallic clicks echoed in my own ears. I reached inside and grasped the spine of the heavy-duty portfolio. I pulled it free. I stood up from my chair. The room felt strangely still despite the ongoing applause. I stepped away from the table carrying the thick black vinyl binder. The red, yellow, white, and black index tabs protruded sharply from the edges of the plastic sleeves. I walked down the center aisle. Each step was measured, deliberate, and unhurried. The soft thud of my loafers against the patterned carpet marked the remaining seconds of the illusion. Trent stood at the front, hand still extended, expecting a single, pristine linen envelope. He expected a quick signature and a celebratory photo. As I drew closer, he registered the sheer size of the object in my hands. He saw the color-coded tabs. His bright, charismatic smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A micro-expression of genuine confusion flashed across his face. The local developers stopped clapping. Men who analyze risk for a living possess a distinct radar for sudden shifts in atmosphere. They watched Trent drop his hand. They watched his posture stiffen. They analyzed the heavy binder I carried, noting that it looked identical to a forensic audit report. I reached the head table. The crystal chandelier overhead cast a bright, unforgiving light across the white tablecloth. I stopped directly in front of the groom. I placed the portfolio on the table directly next to his crystal champagne flute. The heavy binder landed with a solid, definitive thud, silencing the final scattered claps in the room. How will Trent's investors react when the binder is opened? The sound of the heavy vinyl portfolio hitting the white linen tablecloth echoed through the silent banquet hall. The crystal champagne flute next to it trembled slightly. I kept my hand resting flat against the black cover. Trent stared at the binder. The confident posture he held a moment ago began to fray at the edges. A bead of sweat materialized near his hairline. He opened his mouth to speak, but I did not give him the floor. I turned my body away from the groom. I directed my attention toward the circular table positioned just to the right of the head table. The 5 wealthy local developers sat there watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. Men who control millions of dollars in commercial real estate do not appreciate unscripted drama. They appreciate risk assessment. I flipped the cover of the binder open. "My name is Tegan Thompson," I said, my voice projecting clearly, carrying the practiced cadence I use during regulatory board meetings. "I am a senior compliance officer for a federal financial institution. The man standing behind me just invited you to participate in a dynamic capital venture. Before any of you write a check or sign a term sheet, you need to review his prospectus." Trent lunged forward. His chair scraped harshly against the polished hardwood floor. "Tegan, stop this!" he hissed, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "You are embarrassing the family. Sit down right now." I ignored him. I gripped the red plastic index tab and pulled a stack of stapled documents from the clear sleeve. I walked the 3 steps to the developer's table. I handed the packet directly to the silver-haired man who had been laughing with Trent 20 minutes earlier. The developer frowned, taking the paper. He adjusted his reading glasses. "Exhibit A," I announced, pacing slowly along the edge of their table. "A certified list of corporate entities registered to Trenton Caldwell across 2 states. You will notice a recurring pattern. Caldwell Enterprise Partners, Apex Dynamic Solutions, Caldwell Holdings. Every single entity shares the same status code, dissolved by the state for failure to comply with tax regulations. There is no private equity pool. There is no holding company." The silver-haired man flipped to the second page, his brow furrowed. The other 4 investors leaned in, analyzing the columns of data. Trent stepped away from the head table, his face flushing a dark, angry crimson. "This is a misunderstanding," he called out, attempting to project his voice over mine. "My future sister-in-law struggles with mental health issues. She is having an episode. Someone please call security and escort her to the lobby." Nobody moved. The waitstaff stood frozen against the walls. The string quartet sat like statues holding their bows in midair. "Exhibit B," I continued, my tone remaining level and unbothered. I pulled the next stack from the red tab and placed it on the table. A comprehensive docket of civil litigation, 5 separate breach of contract judgments filed over the last 4 years. The plaintiffs are independent plumbers, electricians, and lumber yards. The judgments total over $60,000. All of them remain uncollected. The youngest investor at the table, a man wearing a sharp navy suit, picked up the civil dockets. He read the names of the stiffed contractors. His jaw tightened. "This is fabricated," Trent shouted, his voice cracking, breaking the facade of the smooth venture capitalist. "Those are old disputes. They were settled out of court." "The final document in that section," I said, speaking directly to the silver-haired developer, "is an administrative ruling from the state licensing board. 2 years ago, Mr. Caldwell accepted a $40,000 cash deposit from a young couple to remodel their kitchen. He demolished their home and abandoned the job site. The board found him guilty of gross negligence and revoked his general contractor credentials permanently. He is legally barred from managing construction projects anywhere in this region." The developers did not ask Trent for an explanation. Men who build genuine wealth recognize a con artist the moment the curtain drops. They know the anatomy of a hustle. The silver-haired man dropped the paperwork onto his dessert plate. He took off his reading glasses and placed them in his breast pocket. He looked at Trent with an expression of pure, icy contempt. "We are done here," the developer stated. He stood up. The 4 other men at the table mirrored his movement. They did not shout. They did not demand apologies. They buttoned their bespoke suit jackets, pushed their chairs under the table, and walked toward the heavy mahogany doors. Trent scrambled after them, panic bleeding through his tailored tuxedo. "Wait, gentlemen," he pleaded, holding his hands out. "Let me explain the structure. The tax deferments are still valid." The heavy wooden doors swung shut, cutting off his desperate pitch. The investors were gone. Trent stood in the center of the patterned carpet, breathing heavily. The invisible empire he spent 8 months constructing had just evaporated into the humid Oklahoma night. He turned around to face me. His eyes were wide, wild, and frantic. He looked exactly like a cornered animal realizing the trap had sprung. I walked back to the head table. I placed my hand on the binder and flipped to the black index tab. I turned my attention to Brenda and Gary. My parents sat frozen in their chairs. Brenda gripped the edge of the white tablecloth, her knuckles pale. Gary stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. They knew the presentation was not over. I pulled the fraudulent quitclaim deed from the plastic sleeve. I slid it across the linen fabric until it touched Brenda's silver charger plate. "You forgot to erase the pencil marks, Mom," I said, keeping my voice devoid of any emotion. The initials on the jurat block were a very sloppy touch. Brenda stared at the document. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin an ashen gray. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. "Did you really think I would ignore a direct threat to my real estate?" I asked, looking down at them. "You mailed this decoy to my office to keep me distracted. You planned to forge my signature on the original copy and have Donna Peterson stamp it. You tried to steal my home to provide collateral for his next scam." Gary swallowed hard. Teaganey started, his voice raspy and weak. "We just wanted peace. We just needed a way out." I pulled the incident report from the bank and dropped it next to the deed. Attempting to impersonate me on a recorded line with a federal financial institution is wire fraud, I stated. Drafting a fake property transfer is extortion, and pulling a licensed notary public into a criminal conspiracy carries mandatory jail time. Brenda flinched at the word jail. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over her carefully applied makeup. "I filed a preemptive fraud alert on my property parcel on Wednesday morning," I explained, ensuring every person at the surrounding tables heard the mechanics of their failure. "The title is locked. Nobody can transfer that deed without my physical presence and a biometric scan. But more importantly, I filed a formal grievance with the state notary board this afternoon regarding Donna Peterson. They are launching an audit of her official journal on Monday morning." Brenda let out a sharp, strangled gasp. She covered her mouth with both hands. Donna was her closest friend. Donna was the loyal disciple who trusted her blindly. By initiating the audit, I guaranteed Donna would lose her state commission, her job, and her reputation. Brenda realized in that exact moment that her pristine social standing within her church community was eradicated forever. The banquet hall was dead silent. The clinking silverware, the soft murmurs, the artificial laughter, all of it was gone. The extended family sat at their tables, staring at the head table in shock. Aunt Susan looked horrified. Cousin Mark stared at his shoes. The smear campaign Brenda orchestrated to isolate me had backfired spectacularly. I had just provided documented proof of their criminal behavior to the exact audience she assembled to witness my humiliation. Trent stood near the empty investor table, running his hands through his carefully styled hair. He had no funding, he had no collateral, he had a room full of witnesses who just watched his entire history of fraud get exposed on paper. His ecosystem collapsed in less than 3 minutes. I closed the heavy binder. The metallic click of the rings shutting echoed like a judge's gavel. The extortion attempt was dismantled. My assets were secure. The predators were declawed. I looked across the head table. Cassidy sat motionless. Her crystal champagne flute rested untouched next to her plate. Her designer gown suddenly looked like a costume. She was staring at Trent, her eyes wide, searching his face for a denial that was never going to come. She looked at our parents, watching them cower under the weight of their exposed crimes. "Trent is ruined," The investors are gone, the false deed is useless, but my sister is still sitting there waiting for an explanation. What happens when she learns the truth about the $80,000 loan carrying her name? The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the banquet hall swung shut, clicking into place with a definitive metallic echo. The 5 local developers were gone, taking their capital and their unblemished credit scores with them. The vacuum they left behind sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. A profound, uneasy quiet settled over the Oak Ridge Country Club. The string quartet sat frozen, holding their bows across their knees. The waitstaff lingered in the shadows near the kitchen swinging doors, uncertain if they should clear the cold plates of filet mignon or pretend to be invisible. Trent stood in the center of the patterned carpet, staring at the closed doors. The smooth, charming veneer he wore all evening fractured into a dozen desperate pieces. He plunged his hand into his tailored tuxedo pocket and pulled out his cell phone. His thumbs flew across the illuminated glass screen, tapping out frantic text messages to the men who just walked out on him. He paced in a tight circle, muttering under his breath, running his free hand through his carefully styled hair. He did not look at my parents. He did not look at me. Most importantly, he did not look at his bride. In his moment of ultimate crisis, the illusion of romance vanished. He only cared about the lost marks. The extended family sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The social currency of the evening plummeted to zero. Aunt Susan picked up her beaded clutch from the table, avoiding eye contact with everyone. She stood up, motioning for her husband to follow. Cousin Mark abandoned his imported beer on the white linen and slipped toward the side exit. The Thompson family ecosystem operates on the principle of self-preservation. They gathered tonight to witness my humiliation and feast on Trent's imaginary wealth. Now that the feast turned out to be a federal crime scene, they scattered like roaches under a sudden light. Cassidy sat at the head table, watching her future husband pace across the empty dance floor. She watched her aunts and uncles shuffle toward the coat check without saying goodbye. The fairy tale she spent 8 months broadcasting on social media was dismantling itself in real time. She turned her gaze toward me. Her manicured hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned a stark, translucent white. The shock in her eyes morphed into a raw, searing hatred. She pushed her chair back. It tipped over, crashing onto the hardwood floor. "You ruined my life!" Cassidy screamed. Her voice shattered the quiet of the banquet hall, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. She marched around the table, her designer gown catching on the carpet. Tears cut through her flawless makeup, leaving dark streaks of mascara down her flushed cheeks. She stopped 3 feet in front of me, her chest heaving. "You could never just let me have anything," she spat, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You sat in your sad, empty apartment, auditing spreadsheets, while I was building a future. You were so jealous of Trent. You were so jealous that Mom and Dad picked my wedding over your selfish boundaries. You brought that stupid binder here just to humiliate me in front of everyone. You destroyed my wedding." She stood there, trembling, demanding an apology. Growing up, this tactic always worked. If Cassidy cried, Brenda and Gary rushed in to soothe her, demanding that I concede whatever argument we were having to keep the peace. Cassidy expected me to shrink back. She expected me to feel the crushing weight of sibling guilt. She genuinely believed her biggest problem was a ruined dinner party and a canceled honeymoon. I looked at my younger sister, feeling a profound, chilling absence of anger. I only felt pity. She was a hollow shell of entitlement constructed by parents who insulated her from consequence. They built her a beautiful, comfortable cage, and tonight I was going to show her the lock. I did not raise my voice. I did not step back. I reached out and opened the thick vinyl portfolio resting on the table. I bypassed the red tab detailing Trent's lawsuits. I bypassed the black tab holding the forged deed. I placed my finger on the stark white index tab. I pulled a thin stack of printed paper from the plastic sleeve. "I did not ruin your life, Cass," I said, my tone calm and steady. "They did." I slid the documents across the pristine white tablecloth. The paper glided over the fabric, stopping gently against the base of her crystal champagne flute. Cassidy glared at the pages. She refused to pick them up at first, treating the paperwork like a venomous snake. "Read the top line," I instructed. She swallowed hard, blinking away the tears. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the bold black text printed across the official state form. It was the Uniform Commercial Code financing statement. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dropping to a confused whisper. "It is a public registry of secured debt," I explained, keeping my gaze locked on her face. "Look at the box on the left side, the one labeled primary debtor. Tell me whose name is typed inside that box." Cassidy traced her manicured finger across the page. She found the designated box. Her own name stared back at her, Cassidy Thompson. She frowned, shaking her head. "I do not understand. I never took out a commercial loan. Trent handles all the corporate financing. He told me to sign a partnership agreement for the new holding company. He said it was just a formality for the tax documents." I shifted my focus to Trent. He had stopped pacing. He stood near the edge of the dance floor, staring at the white paper on the table, his face drained of all remaining color. He knew exactly what document I pulled from the binder. "He lied to you," I told my sister. "That was not a partnership agreement. You signed the origination paperwork for a high-interest personal loan from a predatory boutique lender based in Nevada. Look at the principal amount printed at the bottom of the page." Cassidy's eyes darted to the bottom of the form. She read the bold numerical figure, $80,000. A quiet, agonizing gasp escaped her throat. She stumbled backward, bumping into the edge of the heavy wooden table. She pressed her hand against her chest as if she could physically stop her heart from racing. 80,000, she repeated, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. "I do not have $80,000. I teach yoga twice a week. I cannot pay this." "You were never supposed to pay it," I clarified. Trent needed a fresh injection of cash to keep his illusion alive after his previous ventures collapsed. Traditional banks flagged his Social Security number years ago. He needed a clean credit profile to secure the funds. He needed a mark. You handed him your pristine credit score, and he leveraged it to the absolute maximum limit. Cassidy turned toward Trent. Her eyes begged him to interrupt. She waited for the charming venture capitalist to walk over, take her hand, and explain the brilliant financial strategy behind the paperwork. She waited for him to tell her it was just a temporary bridge loan, a mere stepping stone toward their wealthy future. Trent did not move. He looked at the exit doors, measuring the distance between his tailored tuxedo and the parking lot. Cassidy turned back to the table, her hands trembling as she picked up the financing statement. Her eyes scanned the remaining boxes. She found the section designating the official loan guarantors. She read the names Gary Thompson and Brenda Thompson. The paper slipped from her fingers, drifting down to land on the patterned carpet. She looked at our parents. Gary stood perfectly still, clutching his glass of bourbon, staring at the ice melting inside it. He could not meet her gaze. Brenda sat in her banquet chair, her emerald-beaded gown suddenly looking heavy and ridiculous. "You knew," Cassidy whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the realization. "You co-signed it." Brenda's knees buckled under the invisible pressure. She slumped forward in her chair, burying her face in her hands. A loud, wretched sob tore through the quiet room. The pristine illusion she guarded for decades shattered into dust. "We had no choice," Brenda wept, her words muffled behind her trembling fingers. "Trent promised us a staggering payout. He said the new acquisition was guaranteed. He showed us the projections. We gave him the cash from our savings, but it was not enough. The vendors required more capital to finish the project." She lowered her hands, revealing a face ravaged by fear and humiliation. "We took a second mortgage on the house, Cassidy. We leveraged everything. When the house money ran out, Trent said the whole deal would collapse if we did not secure one final bridge loan. He said your name was the only one clean enough to clear the underwriting process. We co-signed it to protect our initial investment. We were just trying to get our retirement money back. We thought we were saving the family." Cassidy stared at her mother. The golden child, the favorite daughter, the girl insulated from every hardship, suddenly grasped the cold mathematics of her own existence. She was not a cherished princess. She was a line of credit. When her parents realized they were sinking under a subprime mortgage, they did not throw her a life preserver. They tied their anchor to her ankle and threw her overboard to buy themselves a few more months of breathing room. They sold her future to appease a con artist. They guaranteed $80,000 of toxic compounding debt in her name, knowing she possessed zero capacity to repay it. They ruined her credit score, her financial independence, and her trust in a single calculated stroke. The silence in the Oak Ridge Country Club felt heavier than the humid air outside. The string quartet packed their instruments without making a sound. The waitstaff retreated into the kitchen. Trent took a slow, quiet step backward, inching closer to the mahogany doors, preparing to abandon his bride and the financial crater he created. I stood at the head table, looking at the shattered remnants of the Thompson family. The ledger was open. The truth was printed in black ink. How does a family survive a betrayal of this magnitude? Trent took another step backward away from the head table. His polished leather shoes slipped slightly on the hardwood floor, breaking the frozen silence of the banquet hall. He did not utter a single word of apology to the woman wearing a white designer gown. He did not attempt to salvage his dignity or offer a fabricated excuse to my parents. He simply turned his back on the wreckage he orchestrated and shoved his way through the heavy mahogany doors. Through the tall, panoramic windows of the country club, we watched him sprint across the illuminated asphalt of the parking lot. He jumped into a sleek, leased sports car. The engine roared, shattering the quiet night air. The red taillights disappeared down the winding private drive, fading into the dark Oklahoma landscape. He skipped town before the catering staff even cleared the dessert plates from the tables. By Monday morning, his cell phone number played an automated, disconnected tone. He left behind a blast crater of toxic debt and shattered trust. The venture capitalist vanished, leaving his victims to face the collection agencies alone. He is likely sitting in a different state right now, spinning the exact same web of lies for a fresh batch of gullible marks to fund his existence. Cassidy remained frozen in the center of the room, staring at the empty space where her groom had stood seconds prior. The glittering illusion she spent 8 months broadcasting to the world was dead. The grim reality of her situation settled heavily over her shoulders. She was 26 years old, unmarried, and legally chained to a predatory loan she never spent. The Nevada alternative lender did not care about broken engagements or familial betrayal or tearful explanations. They operated on cold, unforgiving mathematics. They only cared about the signature she foolishly applied to the financing statement. Within 30 days, the relentless collection calls started ringing her phone every morning. She stopped answering unknown numbers, living in a constant state of dread. Within 60 days, the compounded penalties ballooned the principal balance to a staggering, undeniable sum. Her pristine credit profile flatlined, plummeting into the lowest possible bracket. She could not qualify for a reliable car loan or a standard apartment lease. The golden child finally understood the true cost of being the favorite daughter. The protection she enjoyed her entire life was a mirage designed to keep her compliant. She packed her belongings into black plastic garbage bags, mirroring the exact way our parents packed my clothes 14 years ago. She moved out of their suburban house in the middle of the night, leaving no forwarding address on the kitchen counter. She now rents a tiny, cramped room in a shared duplex across town. She works double shifts at the yoga studio just to cover the minimum interest payments on a debt that will haunt her for a decade. She refuses to speak to Gary or Brenda. The silent treatment she weaponized against me for years became her only defense mechanism against the people who sold her future. Brenda and Gary returned to their suburban ranch house that Friday night, carrying the suffocating silence of impending doom. The subprime lender holding their second mortgage possessed zero patience for domestic tragedy or financial miscalculations. The lender wanted their monthly payment. When Gary missed the first installment, the bank issued a formal written warning. When he missed the second payment, they initiated the legal foreclosure process. 3 months after the disastrous rehearsal dinner, a county sheriff walked up their paved driveway and taped a neon foreclosure notice to their front door. The suburban fortress was officially breached. 12 years ago, my father threw a backyard barbecue and burned his original mortgage papers to celebrate his financial independence. Today, he lost the home he spent 30 years working to pay off. The bank seized the property to satisfy the toxic equity draw Trent convinced them to take. My father now works 30 hours a week checking receipts at a local big box hardware store, trying to scrape together enough cash to rent a small ground floor apartment. His proud, unyielding posture is gone, replaced by a permanent, exhausted stoop. The man who used to lecture me about the moral superiority of living debt-free now answers to a manager half his age just to keep the lights on. He spends his shifts checking the receipts of strangers while knowing his own ledger is hopelessly underwater. Brenda suffered a fate far worse than mere financial ruin. She lost her audience. The state notary board opened a formal administrative investigation into Donna Peterson regarding the fraudulent quitclaim deed draft. Donna avoided criminal prosecution by voluntarily surrendering her state commission and cooperating fully with the investigators. She told the review board exactly who handed her the paperwork and what they asked her to do. The damage to my mother's social circle was swift and permanent. The Wednesday night church group excommunicated Brenda. The women she spent decades gossiping with now cross the street when they see her walking toward them at the grocery store. The neighborhood feeds on the details of her downfall, sharing the story over coffee and front porch conversations. She traded her eldest daughter for a seat at a wealthy table and ended up sitting alone in a rented living room. The reputation she guarded with ruthless efficiency turned into a cautionary tale whispered in the church pews. She has no assets, she has no social standing, she has no favorite daughter to parade around. She is left with nothing but the echo of her own terrible choices. I watched the fallout from a safe, deliberate distance. I did not intervene, I did not offer financial assistance or emotional support when the collection agencies started calling them. I maintained the perimeter I built on that rainy Wednesday morning. My role as the family auditor concluded the moment I closed that heavy vinyl binder. I placed the blue folder containing their public records into the bottom drawer of my desk at the bank and locked it. The compliance division promoted me to a senior investigative role the following month. They appreciated my meticulous attention to detail and my ability to remain calm under severe pressure. I spend my days tracking real criminals, ensuring the banking system remains secure. I leave the office at 5 o'clock every evening. I drive through the Tulsa traffic, listening to audiobooks. I pull into the secure underground garage of my building. I ride the elevator to the top floor. I walk down the quiet, carpeted hallway and slide my key into the brass lock of my front door. The heavy door swings open, revealing the exposed brick walls and the tall windows overlooking the Arkansas River. The evening sun casts long, warm shadows across the polished concrete floors. I step inside and pull the door shut behind me. The deadbolt clicks into place with a solid, satisfying snap. It is the sound of an unbroken boundary. It is the sound of safety. I take off my heels and walk into the kitchen. I fill a small copper watering can from the sink. I spend 20 minutes tending to the potted ferns and the trailing pothos plants lining the windowsill. The apartment is perfectly quiet. There is no yelling. There is no manipulation. There is no guilt hanging in the air. The space belongs entirely to me. I earned it with my own paycheck. I protected it with my own intellect. A predator tested the fences and the fences held firm. My family attempted to price my worth and learned they could not afford the cost of doing business with me. You can choose the ledger you live by. I zeroed out my balance and walked away. If your family treats you like a bank instead of a daughter, drop a comment below and subscribe to Morning Revenge. There is a profound, often unspoken architecture to the traditional American family. We are raised on a specific cultural blueprint: the suburban home, the manicured lawn, the promise that if parents work hard and sacrifice, their children will inherit a foundation strong enough to build their own dreams upon. But what happens when that foundation is poured using the cheap, crumbling concrete of pride, denial, and conditional love? The story of the Thompson family is not just a cautionary tale about a clever con artist or a forged real estate document. Beneath the surface of the subprime mortgages and the fraudulent quitclaim deeds lies a much deeper, more devastating tragedy. It is a story about the catastrophic failure of parenting. It forces us to hold up a mirror to the values we pass down to our children and asks a terrifying question. Are we raising our children to be resilient, honest adults? Or are we simply molding them to serve our own fragile egos? In many traditional families, there is a dangerous confusion between compliance and character. Gary and Brenda Thompson represented a specific brand of parenting that prioritizes the appearance of success over the reality of stability. For decades, they guarded their social standing with ruthless efficiency. They wanted the neighborhood to see the paid-off mortgage, the pristine truck, and the beautiful daughters. But in their desperate pursuit of the American dream, they abandoned the very emotional awareness and fairness required to actually sustain it. Look closely at how they raised their youngest daughter, Cassidy. She was the golden child, insulated from consequence, showered with unearned praise, and shielded from the harsh mathematics of the real world. Brenda and Gary thought they were loving her by protecting her from hardship. In reality, they were crippling her. By never allowing Cassidy to fail, by never teaching her the sting of accountability, they left her entirely defenseless against a predator like Trent. They raised a daughter who recognized the shine of a heavy gold watch, but possessed zero capacity to evaluate the character of the man wearing it. True family responsibility requires the courage to say no. It requires the emotional intelligence to sit a child down and explain that a lavish wedding is not worth a decade of toxic debt. But Gary and Brenda lacked that courage. When their own pride was threatened by Trent's crumbling illusion, they did not protect their daughter. They panicked. They co-signed an $80,000 loan in her name, effectively tying an anchor to her ankle to keep their own heads above water for a few more months. They sold her future to buy themselves a temporary extension on a lie. It is the ultimate parental betrayal, sacrificing the child to save the image. Then look at Tegan, the scapegoat. The child whose independence was viewed as an insult, whose boundaries were treated as acts of war. The Thompsons demanded her compliance, assuming that because they gave her life, they owned the equity in it. This is a fatal flaw in how we view family loyalty. Loyalty is a bridge built on mutual respect, honesty, and fairness. It is not a blank check. When a family operates like a cartel, where love is transactional and boundaries are punished, it ceases to be a safe harbor. It becomes a hostile environment. Tegan survived because she learned to audit her own life. She learned to look at the people supposed to protect her and recognize them as high-risk counterparties. There is a deep, lingering sorrow in that survival. She secured her assets, she saved her home, and she dismantled the con artist's ecosystem with clinical precision. But she had to grieve the parents she deserved in order to defeat the parents she actually had. If we are to take anything away from the ashes of the Thompson family, it is the absolute necessity of emotional honesty in how we raise the next generation. Children do not need parents who are perfect. They do not need parents who can afford to bankroll extravagant lifestyles or maintain flawless facades in front of a church congregation. They need parents who are brave enough to admit when they are broke. They need parents who value fairness over favoritism, who teach them that true wealth is found in integrity, not in syndicated private equity pools and designer gowns. When we fail to teach our children how to navigate reality, we send them into the world blindfolded. We leave them vulnerable to every charismatic grifter offering a shortcut to the top. The greatest long-term guidance a parent can provide is the unwavering example of accountability. If you make a mistake, you own it. If you cannot afford something, you do not buy it. If your family is fracturing, you heal it with truth, not with forged documents and kitchen table notaries. Stories like this one remind us that the most dangerous threats do not always arrive wearing ski masks or holding weapons. Sometimes they arrive holding a box of bakery pies, demanding a favor in the name of blood. If you have ever felt the crushing weight of a family that treats you like a bank instead of a human being, or if you have had to build a fortress just to protect your own peace, you are not alone. There is a community of people who understand the heavy cost of breaking generational cycles. If you found a piece of your own history in this narrative, take a moment to subscribe and follow the channel Morning Revenge, where we continue to explore the complex, often messy reality of setting boundaries and taking back your life. At the end of the day, Tegan went home to a quiet loft turned a deadbolt she owned outright and watered her plants in the fading evening light. Her parents sat in a foreclosed suburban house surrounded by the ghosts of their own pride, while her sister learned the bitter taste of a ruined name. The dust settles, the ledgers balance, and the truth inevitably rises to the surface. We all inherit a foundation from the people who raise us. But as you look around the architecture of your own life, at the relationships you feed and the boundaries you defend, it is worth asking yourself, who really holds the deed to your peace of mind? And when there is a knock at your door in the middle of the night, are you absolutely certain you know who is standing on the other side?